Right now, as you are listening to this, who do you think is Israel's most dangerous enemy? Is it Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Iran, or Qatar? Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Houthis are bothersome, but Israel has plenty of capacity to deal with them. Hezbollah presents a larger challenge, but Israel still has the upper hand. What about Iran? We, Israel, could very well need the assistance of other countries, such as the United States and allies in Europe. But I'm quite confident that Iran would end up on the wrong side of history. The same goes for Qatar. Right now, as you are listening to this, Israel's most dangerous enemy is fraudulent liberalism across the world. Please don't misunderstand me. I subscribe to aspects of liberalism and have some liberal views. I also have conservative views and moderate views. So, I am not some ultra-conservative mouthpiece who wants to bash liberals for the fun of it. The truth is, I am frantically concerned that fraudulent liberals, with their magnetic buzzwords and surface-level good intentions, will put many politicians around the world in a very uncomfortable position. To choose between saying goodbye to millions of fraudulent liberals' votes come election time, or to continue courageously supporting Israel in her quest to eradicate Islamic fundamentalist terrorism on her borders. Terrorism that could easily spill over to many places in the West, for it already has. But let's put the political dangers aside for now, for it is not liberalism in and of itself that is the issue here. What poses an enormous threat to Israel and the greater Western world is the complete and utter hypocrisy disguised as liberalism, what I call fraudulent liberalism. For example, many so-called liberals are indeed highly educated, meaning they have university degrees. Thirsty for knowledge, they proclaim. Yet, when you present them with certified facts about Israel and Jews, they reflexively refuse to be fact-checked. Mind you, these are the same people who furiously demand that news channels fact-check Donald Trump and others. Many of these so-called liberals also claim to be extraordinarily open-minded and enlightened. It is one of their trademarks. I am a citizen of the world, they tell us. Yet, when you try to have a respectful, mature, and honest conversation with them, not about opinions, but about facts and historical truths, they immediately reject any piece of information that does not perfectly fit into their absurdly unrealistic and narrow-minded views. Many so-called liberals also purport to be totally anti-war, all about love and peace. Who isn't? Yet, on October 7th, Palestinian terrorists infiltrated Israel and massacred, beheaded, burned to death, and kidnapped more than 1,000 babies, kids, women, the elderly, and Holocaust survivors. How many of these so-called liberals took to their social media accounts to condone these barbaric and completely inexplicable acts, and instantly after Israel dropped its first bomb in Gaza, to start going after the Palestinian terrorists who partook in these barbaric and completely inexplicable acts? All you heard from so many so-called liberals on social media was about the quote-unquote women and children in Gaza. People are throwing around accusations of war crimes by Israel, as if war is suddenly supposed to be kind, gentle, and pleasant. I don't think most Israelis are advocating for indiscriminately killing civilians the way Palestinian groups do business. But come on now, war is war. You don't get to butcher our people and then lecture us about proportionality and restraint when we respond. Many so-called liberals love to use catchphrases like live and let live. These are the same people who attend rallies where thousands of other people scream, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." That means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, where approximately 7 million Jews live, including me, in a country called Israel. They aspire for no Jews to live anywhere in or near a future Palestinian state, or whatever the Palestinians want. From the river to the sea is the new Heil Hitler, only that the former waxes much more poetically. Many so-called liberals will vehemently tell you that they are not racist, prejudiced, bigots, anti-Semitic, or the like. Yet many of these so-called liberals proudly attend so-called pro-Palestinian rallies across the world, where thousands of people verbally project vile sentiments about Jews, Israelis or Zionists, do I mean? Enough of the nefarious semantics. Many so-called liberals claim to be all about quote-unquote humanity, no matter where people are from, what religion they subscribe to, or how they live their life. They hate flags, national anthems, borders, and countries. Anything remotely tied to nationalism. All they care about is humanity. These so-called liberals will tell you this is why they are standing up for Palestinians. Mind you, there are countless groups of people suffering in unthinkable ways all the time, in every country, in every part of the world. Yet these so-called liberals never really stand up or show their support for the vast majority of these suffering groups. The only possible way I can explain this rationale is these so-called liberals must be convinced the Palestinians are superior to other groups of people, or that Palestinian suffering is superior to the suffering of other groups of people. How's that for preferential treatment? Many so-called liberals consistently question, mock, and have nothing good to say about the mainstream media establishment. Yet, when this very establishment broadcasts blood libels about Israel, these so-called liberals plaster their social media accounts with the mainstream media's fake news. Many so-called liberals accuse Israel of being colonizers and Zionism of being white supremacy. If Israelis were a bunch of out-of-control colonizers, I am pretty sure more of the world would speak Hebrew. Instead, I am saying, and you are hearing this in English, which tells you all you need to know about how unsuccessful Israeli colonization has been. And never mind that more than 60% of Israelis are either fully or partially of Middle Eastern ethnicity, meaning they look a lot more like the Palestinians than they do like Uncle Sam. If someone has to explain to you that some of the Israeli hostages are black and brown for you to sympathize with Israel, you are the color consumed that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. warned us about. Many so-called liberals obsessively defend the virtue of free speech as a means to normalize hate speech or shut down legitimate responses to it. The very same people voice their nominal support for free speech absolutism in one breath and then call for the censorship of views they despise in another. They slap the word extremist on every other point of view except for theirs. To add insult to injury, they use the notion of peaceful protest to disguise microaggressions, bullying, intimidation, fear-mongering, and gaslighting. These protests and other related demonstrations take place against the backdrop of moral absolutism, an ethical view that virtually all actions are intrinsically right or wrong, regardless of context or consequence. Many so-called liberals will tell you that diplomacy and nonviolence are the only ways to make any real progress. Yet many of them devoutly support Palestinians, a significant amount of whom either directly participate in or enable barbaric terrorism. Many so-called liberals stood arm in arm during the height of movements such as Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. I did as well. But when Jewish lives are lost in the most cruel and unimaginable ways, these so-called liberals basically act as though it is the Jews' fault for being murdered. Many so-called liberals were crystal clear during the Me Too movement. Believe all these women no matter what, they said. Fair enough. I can get on board with empathizing with and supporting women who claim to have been raped or sexually mistreated. But when it came out that women were brutally raped by Palestinian terrorists, many so-called liberals were also crystal clear. Prove it. Many so-called liberals believe the most important thing right now is to help the so-called innocent Palestinians in Gaza. And they certainly are not the first people to have this truly noble desire. I say this seriously, not sarcastically. For decades, the Palestinian leadership, both in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, have received billions of dollars in foreign aid. Where all this financial aid has gone exactly, I'm not sure. but I find it puzzling that Gaza seems to be running out of everything, except for rockets and tunnels designed to maximize Hamas's explicit mission to annihilate Israel. Many so-called liberals will tell you that the current rhetoric about terrorism from Israeli officials reminds them of post-9/11 talking points in the United States and other countries. My only question is, what about beheading babies, brutally raping women, kidnapping kids and elderly folks, and massacring over 1,000 people does not scream terrorism? Many so-called liberals claim to be among the most compassionate and loving people in this world. But when you tell them that what they are doing and saying is anti-Semitic, if not in intention then in outcome, they say things like, everyone has a right to their own opinion. Even worse, they try to one-up you by saying things like, yeah, but the poor people in Palestine, the Palestinian children. There's a word for this. It is called gaslighting or coercive control. In other words, extreme psychological manipulation with the aim of having the other person's reality repeatedly questioned and unacknowledged. Lastly, many so-called liberals are Jews themselves, and some of them will say things like, I'm a proud Jew, even as they predominantly side with people who openly despise Jews. These Jewish so-called liberals attend rallies by Jew haters under the banner of quote-unquote pro-Palestine, completely naive to the unfortunate reality that these Jew haters accommodate Jewish liberals because they relish in seeing and promoting Jew-on-Jew hate. Today, these Jew haters accommodate these Jewish liberals. But tomorrow or the next day, or next week or month or year, these Jew haters will turn on them. How do I know? Because history is loud and clear about this? Yeah, but history is just stuff written by the victors, many of these so-called liberals say. In some cases, this is definitely true, but not in all cases. We have an incredible amount of documentation and footage from and about the Holocaust, for example, and the winners of the Holocaust were not the Jews. Yet it is the Jews who have largely retained the crude memory of the Holocaust through memorials and museums in Israel and across the world, to bless the memory of innocent lives lost and serve as a painful reminder that these atrocities should never happen again. You see, the thing about many so-called liberals is that they are not even liberals. They use the terms liberal and liberalism because they have good connotations in many circles, especially in academia and big cities like Los Angeles, Berlin, Shanghai, Sydney, Buenos Aires, Toronto, and Cape Town. But if your interpretation and manifestation of liberalism is inherently hypocritical, then you are not a liberal. You are a fake and a fraud.